You finally get the emergency jar to $1,000. Not rich, not relaxed forever. Just a glass jar on the kitchen table saying, for one quiet second, a surprise bill might not wreck the whole week. Then the renewal notice lands beside it. $600 due. Same lamp, same cold coffee, same little receipt pile. But now the jar looks less like safety and more like bait. The jar can do its job, which is good. The job just feels unfair. The table does the math nobody invited. 1,000 minus 600 leaves 400. You did the responsible thing, and the safety feeling still shrank in one envelope slap. So the question is not whether the jar helped. It did. The question is why this exact kind of surprise keeps arriving with a due date attached. Future you is not here yet. For now it is just you, the bill, and the first bad thought. So you pay it, nobody claps, because adulthood is mostly paying things and then standing quietly near appliances. The jar dropped from $1,000 to $400. The math is simple enough to be rude. The feeling is messier. It feels like life attacked the jar again. It feels like the emergency fund did exactly what it was supposed to do. And somehow, you still lost the only cushion you had. That is why the embarrassment lands before the logic does. A jar that saved you can still look like a jar that failed you when the label drops that fast. But look at the bill for a second. It has a due date, it has a renewal period. It did not fall from the ceiling wearing a tiny parachute. It was waiting somewhere on the calendar. That does not make the payment painless. It does change the mystery. Maybe the jar is not broken. Maybe it is being asked to remember dates your monthly budget forgot. So the jar has to rebuild while the calendar quietly keeps turning pages. For the next few months, you rebuild. A little from one paycheck, a little from the next. The jar creeps from $400 to $650 to $850. No heroic money montage. Just the same kitchen table, a paycheck envelope, a work badge on the chair, and coffee reheated enough times to develop seniority. Each deposit feels less like progress and more like putting the chair back upright after the room already shook once. Every payday feels like you are repairing a wall that might get hit again. You are not naming the system yet. You are just trying to make the jar look safe before the next envelope learns where you live. The hard part is the whiplash. The balance rises, but normal life keeps tapping the glass. Small errands, background costs, the quiet hum of being an adult. And because the next hit is still invisible, every calendar page starts to look suspicious. The jar is climbing, but relief is moving slower than the year. Month 5 shows up wearing normal shoes. The jar is not healed exactly, but it has stopped looking like it needs a tiny cast. Then you see the wall calendar. Registration, $240, circled in red. The car keys hang there with guilty little eyebrows, as if they have been attending meetings without you. This is where the jar starts to feel haunted. Some money is for true unexpected expenses, the kind that do not ask the calendar for permission. But a non-monthly bill can hide outside the monthly routine, so your brain files it under later, and later walks into the kitchen holding an invoice. If the jar pays this too, the jar gets blamed again. Not because the jar failed, because the bill had a date but no place to sit. Now the calendar stops looking like wallpaper and starts looking like evidence. You pay the registration notice on another bill-paying night. The phone calculator glows, the grocery bag is still on the chair. The jar's coin line sinks again. Nobody outside the kitchen sees it, which somehow makes it feel worse. You did the responsible thing, and the table still looks like it is grading you. This is the moment a lot of people quietly stop trusting the jar. Not because saving is pointless, but because the jar keeps being asked to play defense for bills that already had names. Here's the problem future you will eventually point at. One container is doing two jobs. The jar is handling the real unknowns, and it is also paying bills that had rough dates all along. So when a predictable but irregular bill has no separate parking spot, it walks straight to the emergency jar and takes a chair. The jar works, then gets accused of failing. This one leaves a clue. It came from the calendar. And once you see that clue, the uncomfortable question changes. How many of these surprises have been here before? Zoom out for one source receipt, then come right back to the kitchen table. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reported average vehicle insurance expenditures of $1,993 for all consumer units in 2024, up from $1,775 in 2023. On the page, that official-looking number sits beside your marked-up bills, wearing the same coffee ring. The point is not a fancy data detour. It is that annual household costs are real, and they do not always enter your life as neat, identical 12-part monthly episodes. Transportation, healthcare, cash contributions, miscellaneous expenses, personal insurance, and pensions. The year has categories that stack paper off screen. When the stack finally lands, the emergency jar gets nominated because it is visible, reachable, and already sitting there like the household intern who knows Excel. So the question stops being, why am I uniquely bad at this? And becomes, what part of the year is arriving all at once? Then, the year does what years do. It gets late. The calendar flips toward holidays, birthdays, travel, gifts, whatever your version looks like. On this kitchen table, the envelope says $360 for holiday, gift, or travel spending. These are simple example numbers, not your exact bills. No one kicks down the door. A card, a meal, a train ticket, a gift tag all arrive looking optional until they stack into a real cost. So the emergency jar gets pulled into social life. You want to show up for people, and the jar is sitting there with cash and a very breakable emotional boundary. If a version of this envelope comes back most years, it is not behaving like a brand new emergency. It is behaving like a repeat guest who refuses to RSVP. Leave the $360 envelope on the table. Future you is about to put it beside the earlier $600 and $240. This is where future you walks in. Not glowing, not wise in a robe, just you, slightly more tired, holding last year's calendar and a marker that has seen things. You expect the lecture. Instead, future you puts last year's calendar beside this year's bills and starts circling. The marker makes small, ordinary sounds on the page. No dramatic speech, just circle, 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 until the year starts confessing. Insurance, registration, holiday, gifts, travel. The dates are not identical twins, but they are close enough to make the jar look falsely accused. Some knocks at the door really are emergencies. Some months really do not have extra room. But these circles change the question from, why does life keep surprising me? To, which surprises keep making appointments? Future you taps the marker on the calendar. If a bill has an amount, a season, and a rough deadline, the next move is not a lecture. Future you turns the calendar into a receipt. The circled insurance date pulls over $600. Registration brings $240. The holiday, gift, or travel envelope brings $360. Separately, they feel like three unrelated jump scares. Together, they look like a small annual bill, hiding in pieces. The marker adds them slowly. 600 plus 240 plus 360 equals $1,200 per year. That is the moment the jar stops looking cursed. It was not fighting one monster named life. It was paying several dated bills with no reserve chair at the table. Personal finance often calls that reserve chair a sinking fund, money set aside for an anticipated, non-regular cost before it arrives. But future you does not need the vocabulary to make the point. The calendar already did the hard part. If this year keeps asking for $1,200, the next question is smaller. What would that look like before the bills arrive? On payday, future you slides the old calendar next to the paycheck envelope. The circled total is still $1,200 for the year. $600 insurance, $240 registration, and $360 for holiday, gift, or travel spending. Now the table divides instead of panics. Nobody gets a motivational poster for this part. The power is that the number is smaller early than it is late. $1,200 divided by 12 months is $100 per month. So the calendar bill envelope gets a marker written $100 before the next renewal gets theatrical. That does not make the money painless. If the paycheck is already stretched, the $100 has to compete with everything else on the table. The change is simpler than the feeling. The emergency jar is no longer the only bouncer at the door. The jar can keep its job. The calendar bills get a job too. And next year, when the repeat bill walks in acting surprised, it has somewhere else to go first. Next year, the renewal comes back. Because of course it does. Bills love traditions. This time, the calendar envelope is already waiting on the kitchen table, looking smug for paper. The renewal gets paid from the envelope, not from the jar. The jar does not leap across the table like a tiny financial firefighter. It just sits there, labeled and annoyingly calm. while the coffee cup gets pushed aside. Then, the real knock comes. We don't have to name it, because not every hard moment comes with a neat label. The win is not perfection. It is that a repeat bill did not arrive first and exhaust the emergency money before the real unknown even got a turn. The jar is still standing, because the calendar stopped pretending it had nothing to say. Now future you has one last test for the next bill. Back at the kitchen table, the jar is no longer the only character on trial. The calendar is open. The marker is in your hand. The next blank bill card is waiting for a name. Future you leaves you one question. What kind of bill just walked in? If it was truly unexpected, that is what emergency money is for. If it had a date, a season, a renewal, or even a rough pattern, it belongs in the calendar pile before it crowds the jar. Write it down. Estimate the amount. Give it a deadline. Divide it across the months you have. Not because life becomes perfect, but because the same bill should not get to scare the same jar every year. The power is not the vocabulary. The power is catching the bill while it's still a date, before it becomes a panic envelope on the table. So before the next again, test the bill against the calendar. Tell me in the comments, what is one bill that keeps acting surprised even though it has a date? And subscribe to Stick Finance for the next story, where future you turns a messy money feeling into a number you can actually use.